Hey there, it's Liz from No Trace. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make these super simple, customizable cloth napkin rings so that you can keep all of the napkins that your family is using organized and with the right person. This project is a really great way to use up some of your small scraps of fabric, and they sew up super fast. So let's go. In order to make these napkin rings, I am using some scraps of fabric that are 7 inches long, and then the height of them, it's up to you. These are about 4 inches, so that's going to give me a napkin ring that's a little under 2 inches wide. So you could make your napkin rings more shorter than that or even bigger, but I'm doing 7 by 4, and I've pieced together some smaller scraps of fabric to get that size, but you could obviously just use a single piece of fabric. And then I'm just using regular embroidery floss and an embroidery needle. I want to first find the center point of my scrap of fabric, so I'm folding it in half so that it's now 3.5 inches long, and then opening it up, and then I have a little crease that shows where my center point is, and I'm going to use a piece of chalk. You could also use a pencil, and I'm going to write the initial, so I'm going to put an L for Liz, that is more or less centered on that center line, and I'm going to use this L as my guide for stitching. I'm going to use about an arm's length worth of embroidery floss. So I'm just I like to wrap it up on like a little scrap of cardboard. And now that I have an arm's length, I'm going to cut that. And I'm going to actually split this floss. So if you look closely at embroidery floss, it's actually made up of 6 strands. And I'm going to actually split it in half. So I'm going to use 3 strands of floss for my little embroidered initial here. So I'm just carefully splitting it by kind of unraveling the strands and trying not to get a big knot in the floss. Okay, so now I have 2 pieces to work with. I just need 1 for this little letter L. I also want to point out that the L is near the bottom edge, so you want it to be about a 1/2 inch away or more from that bottom edge, but you don't want it too much in the middle of your scrap because we're going to be folding this in half. So you could always take a moment, fold your fabric in half and make sure you can still see the letter. I'm going to do a really simple straight stitch to fill in this L. Now I am not an embroidery expert at all, but I want to start at one end of my L, bring my needle through, and then I'm going to hold on to the tail of my floss. So I have about 1 inch or so of tail, and I'm going to hold that down in place with my finger. And then I'm just going to, whoops, pulled it through a little bit. You could use an embroidery hoop for this if you wanted, but it's such a small piece to work with. I'm just using my hand. I'm going to stitch forward about 1/8 of an inch, pull the needle through, and get my first stitch on there. And then I'm going to push the needle forward about 1/8 of an inch and actually stitch back towards the first stitch that I made. After I have a few stitches, I don't have to keep holding on to the tail. But in the beginning, you need to hold your tail in place. You could make these stitches smaller than I'm making them, or you could make them bigger. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm just going to do 4 stitches on the bottom of the L, and then I'm going to start coming up the tall part of the L. I'm going to go just to the side of my chalk, which is fine. The chalk is just there as a guide. You don't have to follow it exactly. So I'll just finish up these stitches. Okay, now that the L is done, I'm going to flip over to the back of my napkin ring, and I'm just going to thread my needle through one of my stitches, make a little loop, and make a little knot here on the back. Next, I'm going to fold over one of these short edges, it doesn't matter which one, about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to press it with the iron so that it stays put. just like that. All right, at the machine, I'm going to fold my napkin ring with the right sides together. I'm folding it in half lengthwise, and I'm going to sew with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end. All right, this seam is done. Now I'm going to take a safety pin and just grab a little piece of fabric near one of the openings of this tube that we've created. It's basically, this is a lot like making a scrunchie. If you've ever made a scrunchie, some of this might feel familiar, but I put that safety pin inside the tube and I'm just moving the fabric off the back end and turning my little tube right side out. Ta-da! Once the tube is right side out, we can get that safety pin off and we can cut off any loose threads here. If you're using natural fibers, you can add your little loose threads to your compost, or you could save all of your little threads and use it as stuffing for a future project. Okay, so we have our tube made. What I want to do next is get this raw end inside the folded over end, and all you got to do is bring it on in. And I'm going to try to line up the seams as best I can here, but I'm not going to go crazy over it. And I want to put the raw end about 3/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch on the inside so that it stays secure. Also because I don't need a huge napkin ring. Now, if you have really big napkins, you might want a larger napkin ring. We tend to use pretty small napkins in my house. So I don't need a huge napkin ring. I want the napkin ring to stay on the napkin. So I'm getting this on the inside. And then we'll take it over to the machine once it looks like that. More or less. Straighten it out a little bit more. This is the most fussy part of the napkin ring. We want to sew this seam, but obviously we don't want to sew our ring closed. So I'm going to be kind of holding the fabric back. Let me see if I can get a better view here. Okay, so I'm kind of holding the ring out of the way, and I'm going to get this part of the ring under the presser foot, and I'm going to do a back stitch. And then I'm just going to go straight down, making sure to move this part of the ring out of the way so it doesn't get sewn up. And back stitch at the end. There we go. And just pull your piece off. And it's almost done. Once you trim the loose threads, your napkin ring is done. Thanks so much for watching this video. Hey, if you're into crafty, eco-friendly projects like this one, we have a Facebook group and I'd love to see you in there. The link to join is in the description box below this video, so just click in there and come join our zero waste sewing and crafting community.